Imagine standing on the banks of the Nile in 332 BCE. The golden sun reflects off the river, and the great pyramids cast their eternal shadows across the desert. For centuries, foreign kings have ruled this land, extracting tribute and showing little respect for its ancient gods. Suddenly the horizon trembles, not with the sails of Egyptian boats, but with the thunder of hooves and the glint of bronze armor. Thousands of warriors march in perfect formation, and at their head rides a young king, barely in his 20s, whose name already sends shockwaves across the known world, Alexander the Great. He has come not only to conquer, but to reshape Egypt's destiny forever. By the time Alexander the Great turned his eyes toward Egypt, the land of the Nile was a shadow of its former glory. For nearly 2 centuries, Egypt had endured the heavy hand of the Persian Achaemenid Empire. Ever since Cambyses III had crushed the Egyptian forces at Pelusium in 525 BCE, the once proud kingdom had been reduced to the status of a satrapy, a mere province within the vast Persian dominion. Persian rule brought with it more than just political subjugation. To the Egyptians, it was an insult to their very identity. The pharaoh was not simply a king. He was the living embodiment of the divine, the intermediary between gods and men. Yet the Persian kings, ruling from distant capitals, neither understood nor respected this sacred role. They were conquerors in the material sense, but never pharaohs in the spiritual one. The resentment of the Egyptians deepened with time. Heavy taxation drained their resources. Persian governors garrisoned foreign troops in their cities. Even their temples, the heart of their religious life, were subject to neglect or outright interference. Though Egypt had briefly regained independence during the 28th, 29th and 30th dynasties, these native rulers were short-lived, swept aside once more when Artaxerxes III reasserted Persian control in 343 BCE. So, when Alexander marched into the Near East and dealt the Persians a crushing blow at the Battle of Issus in 333 BCE, a wave of anticipation spread through Egypt. Could this young conqueror be the one to finally cast off the Persian yoke? By 332 BCE, that question had become a reality. Alexander, now pressing deeper into the Persian Empire, advanced southward from the Levant, and Egypt lay directly in his path. But unlike Tyre and Gaza, cities that had resisted and suffered brutal sieges, Egypt would choose a different fate. For the weary Egyptians, Alexander represented not another invader, but a potential savior. And when he reached their borders, he would find not defiance but open gates. When Alexander set his sights on Egypt in late 332 BCE, he was already riding a wave of unstoppable momentum. His triumph at Issus had shattered Persian confidence, and his brutal siege of Tyre had shown the world that resistance was futile. Every step he took drove the once mighty Achaemenid Empire further into retreat. Egypt, lying vulnerable at the empire's western edge, was the next jewel to claim. But unlike the blood-soaked battlefields of Asia Minor and the Levant, the sands of Egypt would not taste Macedonian blood. The Persian satrap of Egypt, Mazaches, assessed his forces and saw only weakness. His garrisons were undermanned, his soldiers demoralized, and most importantly, the Egyptian people themselves were unwilling to defend their Persian overlords. To resist Alexander would mean destruction. To yield might preserve stability. And so, without a battle, Mazaches surrendered. For the Egyptians, Alexander's arrival was not an invasion. It was a liberation. As he marched through the delta and into Memphis, crowds welcomed him with cheers. The priests of the great temples greeted him with open arms. Unlike the Persians who had scorned their religion, Alexander offered sacrifices to their gods, respecting their traditions as though he had always been one of them. The symbolism was powerful. Here was no distant foreign emperor, faceless and indifferent. Here was a young king who walked among them, who honored their gods, who seemed destined to wear the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. In their eyes, Alexander was not just a conqueror, he was the rebirth of the pharaoh. From the moment he stepped onto Egyptian soil, Alexander grasped the importance of legitimacy. He knew that swords alone could win territories, but reverence could win hearts. And in Egypt, he was not content with mere conquest. He sought to become divine. In Memphis, the ancient heart of Egypt, Alexander received what the Persians had never truly grasped, recognition as pharaoh. The coronation was not merely a ceremony of state. It was a spiritual transformation. In Egyptian belief, to be pharaoh was to step into the divine order, to become the living embodiment of Horus on earth and the chosen son of the gods. The temples of Ptah, where countless pharaohs before him had offered devotion, now echoed with chants in honor of the Macedonian king. Priests clad in white linen led sacred rituals, presenting Alexander with the double crown, the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt, symbols of a united land under his rule. He was hailed as the legitimate successor, to a line that stretched back 3 millennia, from Narmer to Ramses, from Thutmose to the last native kings. For the Egyptians, this moment carried profound meaning. Here was a ruler who did not mock their traditions or rule from a distant capital, but who walked among them, bowed before their gods, and embraced their vision of kingship. Unlike the Persians, Alexander did not impose foreign customs. He wove himself into the fabric of their identity. For Alexander, the coronation was both practical and visionary. It cemented his authority over Egypt without a drop of blood spilled, and it gave his empire the legitimacy of one of the world's oldest and most prestigious thrones. But it also fed into a growing conviction within him that he was not merely a mortal king, but a figure destined for divinity. Standing in the halls of Memphis, crowned in the sacred regalia of Egypt, Alexander was no longer simply the conqueror of Asia. He was Pharaoh, son of the gods, ruler of the Nile. And this new identity would soon lead him to seek confirmation of his divine destiny in the burning sands of the western desert. After his coronation in Memphis, Alexander's ambitions stretched beyond politics and conquest. He wanted something greater, confirmation of his divine status. In the Egyptian worldview, Pharaoh was not just a ruler. He was the son of the gods. To fully claim this role, Alexander set his sights on the remote and sacred Oracle of Amun at the Siwa oasis, deep in the Libyan desert. The journey itself was perilous. The desert between the Nile Valley and Siwa was vast, harsh, and unforgiving. Ancient writers described sandstorms that could swallow armies, blinding sunlight that scorched the skin, and endless dunes where travelers could lose their way forever. Yet Alexander pressed forward, guided by a mix of determination and faith. According to legend, divine forces aided his path. Some accounts speak of sudden rainstorms quenching the thirst of his men, or of ravens and snakes guiding his column through the shifting sands. Whether these stories were fact or myth, they reflected a deeper truth. Alexander's march to Siwa was framed as a journey of destiny, a pilgrimage rather than a campaign. At last, after days of hardship, he reached the sanctuary of Amun. The priests welcomed him with great reverence, for in their eyes he was already pharaoh, already divine. Within the sacred chamber, Alexander posed a question, though history never preserved his exact words. Did he ask if he was truly the son of Zeus Ammon? Did he seek assurance of his world-conquering destiny? The oracle's answer remained deliberately vague, yet it satisfied him completely. From that moment, Alexander no longer spoke of himself as merely a king. He believed himself chosen, touched by divinity. For the Egyptians, this revelation aligned perfectly with their traditions. Their pharaoh had been confirmed as the son of Amun, god of creation and kingship. For Alexander, it was even more profound. It gave him the spiritual mandate to rule not just Egypt but the world. The desert had tested him, and the gods had answered. Now, with divine approval burning in his heart, Alexander turned back toward the Nile, ready to inscribe his legacy into the very stones of Egypt. With the blessings of Amun at Siwa, Alexander returned to the Nile with renewed purpose. Yet his vision for Egypt went beyond conquest and coronation. He understood that empires are not sustained by armies alone, but by cities, centers of culture, trade, and governance. It was here on the Mediterranean coast that he would plant the seed of his immortality, Alexandria. In early 331 BCE, Alexander chose a site near the small fishing village of Rakotis. The location was strategic. Nestled between the Nile Delta and the Mediterranean, it offered access to both Egypt's fertile interior and the bustling maritime trade routes that linked Greece, Asia, and beyond. To the west lay the island of Pharos, a natural harbor that could be fortified, and which would one day host the famous lighthouse, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Legend says that when no chalk was available, Alexander marked out the city's boundaries on the ground with barley flour. The lines formed a grand design. Broad streets crossing at right angles, markets, temples, and harbors. It was a Greek city at heart, but one destined to merge seamlessly with Egyptian tradition. Though Alexander himself would never see the city completed, Alexandria would rise to become one of the greatest metropolises of the ancient world. It would house the legendary Library of Alexandria, a beacon of knowledge that sought to gather all the wisdom of mankind. It would become the capital of the Ptolemaic dynasty, where Greek rulers sat on the throne of the Pharaohs, blending Hellenistic and Egyptian traditions into a unique civilization. For the Egyptians, Alexandria was more than stone and mortar. It was a symbol that their land, so long oppressed, was now the center of a new global vision. For Alexander, it was a statement of permanence. Conquests could fade, battles could be forgotten, but cities endure. And in Alexandria, his name would echo for millennia. For centuries, Egypt had endured the heavy hand of Persian domination. The Persians had treated Egypt as just another province in their empire, imposing taxes, neglecting temples, and ruling from afar. They never fully understood or respected the sacred role of the pharaoh. To the Egyptians, Persian kings were conquerors but never divine rulers. This is why Alexander's arrival in 332 BCE was so striking. He did not march into Egypt as a destroyer, but as a liberator. Where the Persians dismissed their gods, Alexander bowed before them. Where the Persians drained Egypt's wealth, Alexander promised renewal. By offering sacrifices in temples, honoring Amun, and accepting coronation as pharaoh, he spoke directly to the Egyptian heart. The reaction was immediate. The priesthood, long alienated under Persian rule, saw in Alexander a ruler who could restore the sacred balance between heaven and earth. Their support was vital, for they held enormous influence over the people. To the priests, Alexander's respect was not just flattery, it was legitimacy. The common people, too, welcomed him. For them, the Persians had been symbols of oppression. Alexander was a symbol of hope. His youth, charisma, and military brilliance gave him an aura of destiny. Rumors spread quickly. Here was a man chosen by the gods, even the son of Amun himself. Unlike in Tyre or Gaza, there were no sieges, no massacres, no scars of war. Egypt accepted Alexander without resistance, and in turn Alexander embraced Egypt as part of his grand design. The exchange was not one of force but of mutual recognition. For the Egyptians, this was the beginning of a new chapter. They had not been conquered, they had been redeemed. And for Alexander, it was proof that conquest could be achieved not only through the sword, but through reverence, vision, and respect for the traditions of those he ruled. Alexander was not only a warrior, he was a strategist of extraordinary vision. His conquest of Egypt was not a mere detour on his march eastward. It was a calculated move that secured one of the most valuable lands in the ancient world. First and foremost, Egypt was the breadbasket of the Mediterranean. The Nile's fertile floodplains produced vast quantities of grain, capable of feeding armies and sustaining entire empires. By controlling Egypt, Alexander gained access to a steady food supply that could support his campaigns across Asia. Second, Egypt's geography offered unmatched strategic advantages. Situated at the crossroads of Africa, Asia, and the Mediterranean, it was a hub of trade and communication. From the ports of the Nile Delta, ships could sail to Greece, the Levant, and beyond. By founding Alexandria on the coast, Alexander ensured his empire had a gateway that connected east and west. Third, Egypt provided a psychological and symbolic prize. For centuries, it had been one of the world's great civilizations, its pyramids and temples monuments to divine kingship. To rule Egypt was to inherit not only land and wealth, but prestige. By being crowned pharaoh, Alexander placed himself in the lineage of rulers who had commanded awe for millennia. Finally, Egypt offered Alexander a secure flank. With the Persians still strong to the east, it was crucial that his rear be protected. By winning over Egypt peacefully, he eliminated the threat of rebellion or invasion from the west, allowing him to focus his energies on the heart of the Persian Empire. In short, Egypt was more than a conquest, it was a cornerstone. It gave Alexander food for his armies, prestige for his rule, a gateway for trade and a secure base for expansion. By embracing Egypt, he was not just expanding his empire, he was laying the foundation for a world that would carry his name long after his death. The grandeur of the Old Kingdom was built upon more than pyramids. It was the result of careful organization and innovation. Agriculture was the kingdom's lifeline. The annual flooding of the Nile deposited rich silt, turning barren desert into fertile farmland. Skilled farmers worked under the supervision of local officials, ensuring that food was produced in abundance and stored in state-controlled granaries. This steady food supply sustained not only the population, but also the massive workforce required for construction projects. Without this foundation of agriculture, the towering pyramids of Giza would never have been possible. Trade also flourished during this period. Egypt exchanged goods with neighboring regions, importing cedar wood from Lebanon, copper from the Sinai, and gold from Nubia. In return, Egypt offered grain, papyrus, and crafted goods. These exchanges strengthened Egypt's influence across the ancient world and brought wealth that reinforced the power of the pharaoh. Religion was another vital force that shaped the Old Kingdom. Egyptians believed the pharaoh was a divine ruler, chosen by the gods to maintain Mayat, the principle of cosmic order, balance, and justice. This belief gave the pharaoh absolute authority and motivated the population to contribute to state projects, as they saw their work as service to both their king and the gods. Temples, rituals, and elaborate burial practices reflected a deep spiritual connection that bound society together under a shared purpose. Through agriculture, trade, and religion, the Old Kingdom became a civilization that could support monumental achievements. Its legacy was not only stone structures, but also the systems that made such wonders possible. Alexander's time in Egypt was brief, yet its consequences echoed for centuries. By entering Egypt not as a conqueror of fear, but as a liberator, and by embracing Egyptian religious traditions, he forged a legacy that would outlast his lifetime. His coronation as pharaoh was not only a personal triumph, it set the stage for a fusion of Greek and Egyptian culture that transformed the region. After Alexander's death in 323 BCE, his empire was divided among his generals. One of them, Ptolemy Biasota, took control of Egypt and established the Ptolemaic dynasty, which would rule for nearly 3 centuries. Under the Ptolemies, Greek and Egyptian traditions coexisted and intermingled. Greek became the language of administration and commerce, while the pharaohs continued to be worshipped according to Egyptian customs. Temples, coins, art, and architecture reflected this unique synthesis, creating a civilization that was neither entirely Greek nor purely Egyptian, but a vibrant combination of both. Alexandria, the city Alexander had founded, became the jewel of this new era. Its harbor facilitated trade across the Mediterranean, while the Library of Alexandria emerged as a center of learning and scholarship unmatched in the ancient world. Scholars from Greece, Egypt, and beyond studied together, collecting knowledge on astronomy, medicine, mathematics, and literature. The city embodied Alexander's vision, a crossroads where cultures met, ideas flourished, and history was made. Even centuries later, historians and travelers marveled at the precision and foresight of Alexander's policies in Egypt. He had not merely conquered, he had created. By respecting the beliefs of the Egyptians and blending them with Hellenistic innovations, he ensured that his rule would be remembered not for destruction, but for transformation. The Egyptian people, who had long endured foreign domination, now witnessed the birth of a civilization that was richer, more cosmopolitan, and strategically poised to influence the Mediterranean world. Alexander's conquest of Egypt thus marked a turning point, not just for the land itself, but for the trajectory of the entire ancient world. Through diplomacy, religion, and urban planning, he had turned a military victory into a lasting cultural legacy, showing that true conquest extends beyond the battlefield to the hearts, minds, and institutions of the people. When Alexander the Great rode into Egypt in 332 BCE, he was not just a conqueror of lands, he became a living symbol of possibility, ambition, and transformation. In a land long oppressed under Persian rule, he arrived as a liberator, and through his careful respect for Egyptian traditions, he became pharaoh, a role that connected him to the divine lineage of centuries. His coronation at Memphis was more than a political act. It was a statement that Alexander understood the power of belief, that leadership extended beyond armies and strategy into the hearts of the people. By honoring their gods, performing sacred rituals, and accepting their customs, he demonstrated that true authority comes not from fear, but from legitimacy. The journey to the Siwa oracle further elevated him in both his own eyes and those of the Egyptians. Whether or not he truly believed himself the son of Amun, the experience solidified a narrative of divine destiny that would guide his ambitions across continents. Alexander had transformed the conquest of Egypt into a spiritual, political, and cultural achievement. Perhaps his most enduring legacy in Egypt was the foundation of Alexandria, a city designed not merely for trade or defense, but as a beacon of knowledge and culture. Under his vision, and later through the Ptolemaic dynasty, Egypt became a melting pot where Greek and Egyptian civilizations blended, producing advancements in science, philosophy, art, and governance that would resonate for centuries. For the Egyptians, Alexander was not a fleeting foreign king. He was a pharaoh who restored hope, blended traditions, and opened their land to a broader world. For history, he exemplified how conquest, when paired with wisdom and vision, can leave a legacy far greater than territorial gain. His brief sojourn in Egypt was not the climax of his military campaigns. It was a masterclass in leadership, diplomacy, and the shaping of a civilization. In the end, Alexander's conquest of Egypt was more than a chapter in a military campaign. It was a testament to the power of respect, strategy, and foresight. A young Macedonian king had arrived, and in doing so, had inscribed his name not only on monuments and maps, but on the hearts and minds of a people, forever entwined with the eternal land of the Nile. He did not merely conquer Egypt, he became part of its story, and in doing so changed the course of history itself.